Okay, today we're going to talk about Chapter 4, the learning process. Our objectives for this chapter are going to be describe the laws and principles of learning, identify the three types of learning domains, define learning styles and discuss the effects of learning styles on the classroom, describe learning disabilities and methods of dealing with learning disabilities with the adult learners, analyze student learning styles and preferences, and demonstrate the methods of dealing with learning disability. Learning is a change in a person's ability to behave in certain ways. This change is traced to two key factors: past experience with the subject and practice. And oftentimes, especially when it comes to skills, we hit on practice, but practice also goes right along with reading, understanding, the reading comprehension or the cognitive side of learning, as well as it does the skill side or the physical. Learning can both occur formally and informally. With formal learning, this is the result of program designed by the instructor. It's a formalized, step-by-step, very organized and orchestrated by someone who's delivering the content. Informal learning is kind of spontaneous, continually changes the learner's behaviors. And a lot of times this type of learning you'll see occur oftentimes during skill sessions. You'll kind of see the light bulb come on at times by the expression on the student's face, that you'll be able to tell they get it. They just got that, and now they understand it more. And now you'll see the eagerness to want to practice more and to perfect that particular skill. Ideal learning is created through a blend: individual curiosity. The individual themselves have a curious point and a note to want to learn. Reflection is, looking back on the whatever has been discussed, maybe been practiced already, or maybe even been read, and then that blend of adapting to the material, rather from the written material, the cognitive side, up to the physical side. And it takes time and it does take patience. And one thing that we have to realize is not everybody catches everything the same way. As an instructor in the fire service, we have a unique opportunity to positively influence firefighters at all levels. Oftentimes, I've had classes with a mixed blend of experience. I've had classes where I've had very experienced personnel down to the new personnel, and you'll always find a way to blend those people together and make for a positive, you know, influence and opportunity on all of the group. As a fire instructor, you're a leader. You're a leader of the class, certainly, but you're a leader and should be a leader in the fire service. And as instructors, we have the responsibility to deliver and teach the information. We also have a responsibility to hone skills. And in order for us to be able to help hone skills, we have to be able to do these skills and be willing to jump in there and demonstrate and practice with our students as well. And this all goes back to the learn by doing. And a lot of our firefighters are really in on this, that they really want to get out there and do those skills. And you'll hear it time and time again. That's what they're there for. They'll say, "This is what I'm here for. I want to do this. I want to do this skill." And as fire instructors, we're to promote positive values and motivations. Each student in your class will have different ways of understanding information, and so we have to be flexible in our delivery. You can't view it as a constant, this is the way this has to be delivered. You may have to reword, you may have to use different examples um, in order to help folks understand your information. Thorndike's 6 laws of learning. The law of readiness. We'll learn when physically and mentally ready. One of the reasons why that we want to have a comfortable classroom, and one of the reasons why that we take regular breaks, is because we want our firefighters to be in that mentally and physically ready state and keep them in that state. And so with that, we want the learning environment to be acceptable and to maintain that mentality. With the law of exercise, learning exercises not only the mind but also the body. And mastery comes through repetition. And when we do skills over and over, and we practice these different skills over and over, same steps. And what two things we're doing is the repetition, number one, and the repetition drives these motions and what we're doing in each step into muscle memory. And so it becomes an automatic thing. That's one of the reasons why if we see or we have a student making a mistake, we want to stop it right then, make the correction. That way they don't learn something and practice something several times and begin to form an incorrect or a bad muscle memory. Next is the law of effect. Most effective when results in satisfaction, a pleasantness, or a reward. And so this is kind of where we make it fun, and there is a degree of satisfaction when there is success, and that's the reward that our students are getting, and that's what we want to cultivate. Not, and it doesn't just have to be with skills, but even with the exercising of the mind, the same thing. You really see it when the light bulb comes on, so to speak, and you can see the expression on a student's face that they get it. There's that degree then of satisfaction, and it's pleasant and it's rewarding, and that's the law of effect is what we want to strive for. Law of primacy, first method concept taught is the first remembered. And so especially when it comes to skill station, we want to make sure that we are demonstrating everything correctly from the first time. And when things change, it can be problematic. This is when, okay, we learned and did a skill one way, and now 10 years later, there's something that has changed in it. And so we learned it one way, but now we're being asked to demonstrate it and present it a new way. And sometimes it's hard to get away from that. So, but remember that that first method concept taught is what they're going to remember. The law of recency is next. Recent practice results in more effective performance. Practice, that the old saying that practice makes perfect, in a sense is true, but I like to state it as practice makes permanent. Again, we are forming muscle memory. And so especially with our skills practice, we want to make sure that that practice is correct every time. And if we find a mistake, stop it. Explain we're not trying to embarrass anybody. We just want you to drive on correctly from this point on and make the correction. And then last is the law of intensity. The more of the senses that are stimulated, the more likely our students will change the behavior. Using our 5 senses, we do so to obtain information in order of learning effectiveness. We use our sight for visual demonstration. Our hearing is listening to a lecture, as an example. Our smell could be the scent of smoke. It could be the gasoline fumes of starting the power saw. Touch, physically handling the equipment, picking up a saw, pulling on the crank of a saw, or moving around a vent fan. This is how we use our touch in handling equipment. Although the fifth one, taste, is rarely used. It's kind of comical, but a lot of things in firefighting we're not going to put in our mouths and taste, but it is one of the five senses, and it's rarely used. Now, firefighters like to eat, and when it comes to lunchtime or snack time, we jump in there and we eat food and drink water and Kool-Aid with the best of them. How does behavior evolve? A behaviorist perspective, learning is a relatively permanent change in behavior. It arises from experience, not necessarily from classroom learning, but from other experience in the particular subject. Behavior may change due to maturing or aging, and certainly we see this happen. I can look back in the early 90s when I first started volunteering in the fire service to where we're at right now, and certainly my behaviors have changed quite a bit. And I look back and sometimes I laugh at myself as the way that I was in 91 and 92, and then some things are shameful with the type of attitude, the cocky attitude and things like that I had at the time with certain things. So we certainly do change our behaviors as we mature. And we go back to talking about experience. We talk about recognition prime decision making. When we teach and we talk about a decision making model, um, recognition primed is someone who is drawing from all of their experience in that particular scenario, along with material, could be written material, it could be all the other data that you've been exposed to, and boom, you make a decision, a split decision, if you will, on a scene. And so we are and do, whether you realize it or not, we're drawing from that experience, and that's recognition prime decision making. Cognitive and our mental perspective, learning is an intellectual process, and that comes from reading the text, reading the material, picking up on written material, and then our experience results in changes in the way individuals view environment, stresses that mental capabilities change the behavior. So, you know, again, we take that with the hands-on, with the five senses, we put all of these things together, and these are the things that change our behavior. So you walk into it, you say you know a little bit about a chainsaw, but that's it. We didn't know a whole lot about, peaked roof ventilation, as an example. We know about a chainsaw, maybe even how to start and run one, but we didn't know precisely how we're going to cut this 4x4, vent hole. And so you have some experience to draw from, but you're still able to take both the cognitive material, put it together with the hands-on. Now we have learned how to cut this hole in a roof correctly and without mistake. And so we have then changed our behavior. We didn't know before, but now we know. Cognitive learning is defined as acquiring knowledge through perceptions and through ideas and also through experiences. This is demonstrated by the recall of knowledge and intellectual skills. It is an internal process shown through external change in behavior. Learning principles that are competency based, these are based on performance. It's not content, but is performance based. This is usually what is tied to skills or hands-on type training. And so when we talk about the JPRs or the job skill sheets, then this is where we are tying this to the step-by-step process, and you're getting checked off for your job performance in that skill. This originates with the idea of needed skills, competencies, job requirements, and your job requirements can be used as course goals or even your lesson goals. And oftentimes it is. When you roll back through the objectives, your skills and even your JPRs may be listed within those objectives for the lesson, and then at some point you're going to blend this together. So you're going to come from, or you're going to move from your cognitive based, or I call it lecture, classroom, didactic, whatever you want to say, and we move to skills. So when we blend that together, boom, we make that connection. And a lot of times you're making that connection during your demonstration of the skill. Putting together and designing a successful competency-based course, uh, following a process to ensure the proper foundation and the components are intact. One, these skills exist, the job analysis has been performed, the standards are identified and set, your course goals are written up and identified, and your lesson objectives are then written down and identified. And these are the two things that go together, your objectives, one, and your goals. And then your skill-based instruction is delivered. And these are the steps that we need to take to blend these things together and make your skills portion successful. The most critical facet of competency-based learning is the skills must be mastered for each competency. Each skill we are striving for a mastery of. So the students must be given time and appropriate instruction. And that's one thing about skills is it simply takes time. Depending on the number of students that you may have and the number of instructors that you have and then the amount of equipment that you have available, all these things have to be planned out and come together, and we need to simply give our students enough time to master and practice these skills. We have to maintain a particular performance level in the field. It's more than just acquiring that first given knowledge. We've got to come to a point of mastery. And you think about it, we know that our job as firefighters is inherently dangerous as it is, and we want the time and should take the time with our folks to practice and these skills and master them. And it even comes down to revisiting uh, the mastery of our skills once a year, that you hit forcible entry of inward and outward swinging doors. We talk about PPE and don gear and do SCBA drills and dig deep into building construction and reading of smoke and these things, because we want to continue our mastery of these skills. Flexibility in a skill-based type learning. The course must be adaptable to the student's needs. The students learn at their own pace. This is something we've got to realize, that then we do have to be flexible with, is students learn at their own pace. You'll have a fair number of them that'll get it right off, boom, they're going to be sharp, and they'll run through 3-4 evolutions, and man, they've really got it. But there's also folks that are struggling with a few different elements of it, and this is something where it's not necessarily anyone's fault. It's just people pick up on things differently, and we may have to either explain something differently, we may have to demonstrate something once again to them, that type of situation. We want to consider individual learning styles. People learn things differently. Some people are more oriented to hands-on and do well. Some people are more oriented to the cognitive side. They can read something, get it. But then when they come out to the skills, they struggle just a little bit on the physical side and the motor skills. And so we got to work with them a little bit on that. We want to provide appropriate immediate feedback. And again, make those corrections immediate. That way we don't get into forming bad muscle memory, or not necessarily bad, but incorrect. And then it's really hard to break those habits once we learn them. Forced learning. Adults cannot be forced to learn. Many adult learners are required to attend training. So that means mandatory trainings. We have to have so many hours a year to maintain certifications and those kind of things. Mandated learning often results in the lack of motivation and poor attitudes toward learning. And I see this in classes that chiefs have asked us to deliver, and just from the comments, and you immediately pick up on people don't want to be there, and they're being forced to do this. And so as instructors, we may need to adjust the lessons, and you could put a spin on it and kind of direct things in, and it may take an hour or two to get good cooperation out of these folks, but most of the time we're able to at least get them involved. And yeah, they got to be there, but we can make it, interesting, and we can also make it fun as well. Some people you're just not going to sway. They're going to puff up and they're going to cross their arms and they're going to sit there and bull up the entire time. And we don't want to allow those folks to disrupt the class, but at the same time make an effort to engage and pique their interest, if you will. Areas of interest. Everybody has certain areas of interest or things that or subjects that they find interesting. This may reinforce the desire to learn, especially if there's the overall class might not be totally interesting for somebody, but there may be a portion of it that's very interesting, and usually you can tell because those students will begin to ask questions. They'll raise their hand and they'll have several questions and maybe even spark up conversation with you during break time. So those are the folks that that they're really interested in certain parts of it. That positive reinforcement may also increase the motivation. So again, we put that positive spin on things, and that reinforces that desire to learn. Know students and their ideas of their interest too. Tap into their knowledge base. It we, we may not know every student personally, but we can engage by engaging in conversation at break times and before class, and that any downtime that you might have, you can pick up on these things. You'll pick up on their knowledge base. Um, some people will be quick to tell you. Some people are more humble about it. You may get a feel for this during question and answer time. Oftentimes, I will facilitate questions during a talk or a demonstration, and I'm kind of requesting feedback, if you will. And then by engaging in that type of conversation, you can pick up on your students' knowledge base, become more effective as an instructor because of this. Adult learning skills. Sharing study skills can assist students in becoming effective learners. So helping one another and talking about the tips and the strategies that will help them either learn a skill, that will either help them, pick up on the cognitive side of things. If you're teaching a class that is going to have a quiz or a small test to quantify the instruction and that feedback that you need, that they understood the objectives, then we can give them some classroom tips and strategies. And for the classroom, we talk about it in previous modules where if you hear it, so you're there for the lecture, you see it, you've read the material, and you view the slides, you write it by taking notes, asking questions, those kind of things, and you practice it, of the skills, you're going to you can retain up to 90% by doing those things and staying engaged. Those are the tips that we can give them. In the classroom is listening and taking notes and staying engaged. Personal study is that read it, hear it, do it strategy. and test preparation. Oftentimes, if there's a test involved, I'll go over with students on how to take a test. Read the question twice. Read the answers, not just the question. You can also, if you're good at grammar in the English language, you can pick up on adverbs, nouns, and parts of a sentence and almost pick an answer and not even know the correct answer. Look at those things. If you don't know an answer to a question, skip it, move on, don't dwell on it. You can come back to it later. Those kind of tips and tricks for your test. In the classroom environment, um, student skills should be asking questions. If you're not getting a lot of questions or folks aren't asking questions, you can facilitate that simply by asking, engaging. You can ask a question and expect an answer. You know, uh, One of the big things for our students is taking notes, and I encourage taking notes even in some of the simplest classes because it helps you remember some of the things. You'll pick up on, oh man, that's neat. I've never heard that before, or that take on it. Write it down because chances are you're not going to remember it 2 days from then. But if you write it down and you look back on your notes, you can. Be a participant in the class. For our student, and the skills in the classroom for them is participate, engage in the question and answer time. One of the big things today is turn off your phones. And it's sad to say that we have to collect phones. We have to ask people to turn off phones, put them on silent. Please don't have your phones out. To me, very rude to an instructor to have a phone out looking at it. We still have students today that do it after they've been told 100 times don't do it. And there's nothing important on your phone for an hour that you can't, do without it. And then connect with peers. Encourage the engagement conversation between one another. This can be done by group activities if you have scheduled those or thought of those and placed them in your classroom setting as well. Putting aside personal study time, our students can develop effective learning skills during this study time. And one thing is time management. And we find this most often in online content where the material is there. It's up to you to read the material. You might listen to a lecture or hear a live lecture or video, and then it's up to you to put together your study skills and time and go through all of the course content. Same thing can be done in between class periods as well. Uh, have a place to study, and a place to study really should be quiet, where you can think, where you can read, where there's no distractions. Prioritize your material. Put things in order as to how you want to accomplish each objective task or goal at hand, and work from there. Or basically just organize your material and your thoughts. Review your class notes. Again, taking notes to me is very important. And so we have to be able to look back and review those notes. Reading of skills, the skill sheets. Look through those JPRs or those skill sheets step by step and read through them. And then you can also use study groups. And the good thing about technology today is we don't all have to meet up at so-and-so's place or the library and have a group study. You can engage in, whether it be Microsoft Team to Zoom to GoToMeeting. There's a lot of these collaborative meeting apps and programs that are free out there. You can actually simply use Facebook Messenger and do the video chat between one another as well. So these are all avenues that we can get together and do group study. Test preparation techniques can be used to help our students prepare for an exam. Participating in study groups is very beneficial. One thing that we want to let them know is don't try to cram. Don't wait till the night before and try to study all this material because it's going to be frustrating. It's counterproductive. It's not going to allow you to remember the content of the material. These are all things that we should have been doing along the way, such as reading, taking notes, reviewing, rereading, write it, see it, write it, hear it, do it. That's what's going to help us maintain and call back the material. Use mnemonics, acronyms. You can also use chunking with acronyms to remember bits and pieces of information as well. And then take breaks. Don't try to study hours upon hours upon hours. Go for an hour or so, take a break, grab a snack, get you something to drink, get back at it, so on and so forth. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This is something we're probably all familiar with at this point. We're going to review it. But the unfulfilled needs at the lower levels can inhibit a person from climbing up to the next step. So we've got a picture here of a ladder. And so sometimes you see it in a triangle form, but we're going to talk about this real quick. But physiological needs, we have roof over our head, food in our belly, those things are taken care of, comfortable classroom, things like that. And then with that, safety, security, and order. We want to make sure right here that we have, again, the things we need, but we're in a secure type environment. There's no worries with what we need. Social affection, how we fit in socially. That this is midway up onto the triangle or the ladder. Self-esteem and our status. The more comfortable we become around our peers, the better we get to know, and that social side of things, it kind of builds self-esteem, and then ultimately we reach this self-actualization step, and that's you're ready to go. You've climbed up to the last step. So with our physiological needs, the most basic human needs such as air, water, food, and shelter, these are all important things to us. This is one of the things that we reiterate by taking breaks often and letting people get up and stretch. You're fulfilling these physical needs as well. Your mind can only absorb what your rear end can tolerate sitting in the chair, and so you start to become distracted when you get tired of sitting. Safety, security, and order needs are associated with maintaining employment or maintaining a status within the organization, or you are a part of that organization. Social needs and affection is related to belonging to a group or feeling, so that sense of feeling accepted with the group and belonging to the group. Oftentimes with a mixed class, we will separate people out into groups and mix them up. Uh, we'll mix folks up to where they're not all of if they had 5 in their group from one department in the class, that you mix them up a little bit to allow them to get to know others and work. But folks do like that sense of belonging into the group. Promotions, certifications, and special awards are all symbols that relate to your students' esteem and their status level. And certainly, you may have the more you move along your timeline and you make more achievements in the fire service, it builds up your self-esteem. Self-actualization involves peak experiences that are profound moments of love, understanding, happiness, and when our students finally complete a skill or a task they've been struggling with, you'll definitely see these moments, these profound moments of hey, and oftentimes the group will, the entire time the group's been cheering an individual on, for a skill, and then you'll hear them cheer at the end, and they'll offer, great job, great job. You'll hear everybody in the group bumping fists and that kind of thing. Graduation day at a recruit ceremony is a great example. We do a muster day at my department, and basically that is just uh, that's a profound moment day all together where we put the understanding of everything together in a few skills. They start out with a 2 mile jog, they come out, do 4 or 5 skills. Once they're done with that, they climb the ladder for their badge. They're presented with their badge, and then we move on to they get a clean up and move on to their graduation ceremony with their families. And this is a big time. And that's all a part of the self actualization process. Bloom's taxonomy learning process seldom takes place solely in one domain. Within the domain, there's levels of learning that build on one another. Each level has the 3 sub-levels of knowledge, application, and problem solving. The 6 levels of cognitive learning. First, we begin with knowledge or the recall knowledge that is acquired in the past, comprehension, the understanding, the meaning of the information. You understand the why, in the information. And then the application, which is actually using the knowledge and the comprehension and using that information. Analysis is the break information into parts. You break it down into parts to help understand all of it. Synthesis is integration information as a whole. And then we evaluate. So our evaluation, we use the standards and the criteria to make the judgment of the value of that information. So understanding this type of learning, each level builds upon the previous level. The most basic is the knowledge, and then the highest is the evaluation level. And so understanding cognitive domain enables us to build more effective lesson plans. It helps us to use students' thinking processes to encourage them to learn and apply new knowledge. Applying this to firefighters, learn terms, facts, procedures, and principles. Translate and explain the facts and principles, and apply the facts and principles to a new situation. So we start with learning those things, the procedures, the principles, the facts. And then we explain that into the principles, the doing, and then we apply the facts and the principles, and we put it into this new scenario where they're able to put all of it together and accomplish. Psychomotor learning, most common domain for firefighters. This refers to the brain and senses telling the body what to do, and then the muscles, or the motor side, telling the body how to move. Also known as kinesthetic learning. This is the part where I always say muscle memory, and we want to learn and reiterate the muscle memory side of things. So we're putting what the brain knows into motion, and we want this done correctly from the start. And again, we immediately correct any mistakes from the start. The 6 levels of psychomotor learning: observation. So we watch a skill actively being performed, and this is the reason why as instructors we demonstrate. And a lot of times in your demonstration of skill, you will demonstrate step by step slow the first time. Then we will speed it up slightly the second time. And then the third demonstration will be in full motion and put together smoothly. And so this allows our students to watch the skill, break it down, and then put all of it together. Imitation is copying the skill activity step by step. This is where we have them step through that particular skill step by step, and this may include us as instructors coaching along the way. And then manipulation, performing the skill based on instruction. There may be coaching. We may be talking through as they step through step by step, just like the military often does in about everything they do. Precision, we want performance of the skill and the activity until it becomes habit. So muscle memory is what we're talking about. Articulation, where the combination of multiple skills together. So we may put together an evolution that has 2, maybe 3 skills together. So we may take the extension ladder, ladder the roof, ready the roof ladder, climb the extension ladder, deploy the roof ladder, and then ultimately get on the roof with a power saw and cut a vent hole. These are like 4 or 5 different skills all together, from locking your leg onto the ladder to deploying both ladders to, starting your saw and climbing it, deploying, cutting the hole, all those things. Several skills come together. So this is articulation, and naturalization is we perform multiple skills correctly all the time. So we reach that point in the process that we can do this and we can do it correctly every time. Understanding this type of learning, each level builds upon the previous level. The most basic is observation, looking at, observing the skills as they're being demonstrated. And then the highest is naturalization, where we're putting everything together correctly every time. The lesson plan should include skill demonstration and then student practice. We've got to have that practice time in there. Without our practice time, they're not going to be able to get, going through it 1 or 2 times a piece is just simply not enough. Students may experiment with new ways to perform the skill. Sometimes you have this trial and error period, and each class that you do, you're going to see some different ways. And one of the things that we want to make sure here is that if they're trying a new way, that it's safe, that we're not violating any of the safety aspects of the class or the particular skill. Psychomotor skills this is our gross body movement, ability to move limbs in a coordinated fashion and in a controlled way. Your fine motor control is the ability to use your hands, fingers, hand-to-eye coordinations, and hearing. Verbal behaviors such as use of sound to communicate, and your nonverbal behaviors such as the use of facial expression and body language to communicate. Developing lesson plans, we identify how a student should perform a skill or a particular activity and then carry out a task analysis. We look at and analyze how are we going to safely carry this out, and then put it in step-by-step form. Identify the steps that are going to be involved in the activity. Some of the examples of this are the comprehensive skill approach, where you demonstrate and the firefighter observes. We may move to then the step-by-step approach, where the firefighter performs the entire skill following a series of steps. We want to be at this point at some time in our practice. And then a repetitive approach, where our firefighters perform skills until habitual. Basically, it's flawless. We have met naturalization, and we are able to perform it without mistake. The instructor asks what if questions along the way in your repetitive approach. Combining multiple skills, firefighters need to be able to adapt to change and can defend the choice of skills. Performing multiple skills correctly all the time Our firefighters can perform the skill naturally in any circumstance. So a lot of times we'll begin with skill session. We may not have all of our gear on. An example could be, okay, we're tying knots. We're practicing knots. We don't have gear on. We don't have gloves on. We're learning the basics. And at some point through the process, we're going to put our gear on. We're going to put our gloves on. Now we got to tie what we just learned, these knots, and with our gear on with less dexterity. And we kind of step through in that way. Practice, practice, practice. Students must practice. And as the brain attempts skills, it also learns what does not work, what not to do. Learning from those mistakes, allow them to happen. Once they happen, or make the correction, stop and go, okay, you see what happened here? This is probably not going to work well. Here's what works better. Let's try this. But again, practice, practice, practice. And what we have to realize is practice makes permanent. We do want them practicing things correctly. Affective learning is the feeling or attitude domain. This focuses on characteristics that make each person unique. Individuals may have developed characteristics over their lifetimes, will not change immediately after learning a new concept. Sometimes there's attitudes and characteristics that we have to work with, and we're not going to be able to immediately change. 5 levels of affective learning: receiving or becoming aware of the skill or concept, then responding, acknowledge implications of skill or the concept and alter the behavior accordingly. Valuing, internalize skill or concept and make it part of everyday life. Organizing, compare and contrast skills with concepts, and then characterize, adopt and personalize a skill or a concept. Each level builds again upon the previous level. With affective learning, the most basic is the receiving, the highest is characterizing. Subtle changes show that students are learning. Examples are acquisition of new values, firefighter willing to learn and attend will attend class regularly. Acknowledgement of the concept, firefighter studies for tests and participates in class activity. And internalization of values, firefighter volunteers for extra credit activity. Oftentimes we see this begin to form and occur in our recruit programs. Could be a new volunteer firefighter that we're spending a lot of time to get those initial certification hours in, and at some point we've piqued their interest and they begin to come back for more, and you begin to see the acquisition of the new values. You'll see a level of discipline will change, if you will, as you go through the different parts of your program. Internalization of the organization of the information. They may pursue continuing education to stay abreast or to keep up on things, um, and to stay ahead or stay on track with new developments and newer technology. Fully adopt the new values. Uh, Firefighters may even pursue a degree in the fire service management, taking that next step forward. Another way of looking at an affective domain is as the marriage of your cognitive knowledge with your psychomotor skills and then their application in the real world by the student. So your students are able to now take both of these things, merge them together, and naturally put these things together and perform the skills on a real life scene. What is a learning style? the way a student learns most effectively. Students' distinct or preferred habitual method of utilizing and processing the information, and the comprised characteristic cognitive, psychomotor, and affective type behaviors. The process of learning directly relates to the learning environment. And again, when we look at the classroom, how the classroom's organized and arranged, right down to comfort, it directly relates to the learning and what your students are going to absorb. Interactions are influenced by the individual's preferred learning style. Um, the core elements of the learning process, if you will. Piaget's theory, help a student learn by going back to the basics. Oftentimes with recruits, we start with the basics. But as we move along and we have folks they are moving along in this affective learning, whether it be continuing education, whether it be they're viewing it as the next step of, it is oftentimes important to revisit the basics and do a review of that. Although the process of learning is invisible, the results are not. And so we see the results with our students. The learning styles and the effects on training. If you teach in a manner that doesn't favor students' preferred learning style, students' discomfort may interfere with the learning process. So we got to be able to recognize and understand all of our students and their learning styles. This comes to know your students. And so if you're teaching a blended class somewhere outside of your home department, as an example, take the time to talk to your students. Talk to them as they arrive for the first class meeting, and begin to engage in conversation back and forth. Ask questions, about their department, about a little bit about them. Again, when we do the introductions, you're asking about a little bit about that person and their career, and that helps us to get to know our students. Most learners can adapt to non-preferred learning styles. The Silberman study, in every 30 learners, 22 learn effectively with mix of the visual, the auditory, and the physical activity that we talked about. 8 will struggle unless material is presented in their preferred learning style. Though this may be, and we may clue into this with, sometimes you'll see it on their face that they're having a little bit of difficult time, that they may raise their hand and ask a few questions. You can tell by the interaction with the question and answer time with them that they're having a little bit of a difficult time. And so we can employ some ways to adapt to their learning style. Other students that are doing well in the class can help with that. Us as instructors can also help with that as well. Learning styles in action that indicate how a student learns, how they like to learn, and how they absorb and learn more effectively. So understanding the learning styles makes better curriculum developers, better trainers, and instructors overall. So balanced programs encourage learning. Understanding these styles, it helps us as instructors to gain understanding of the strengths and the weaknesses of our students. Essential with trend towards continuing education, and should be able to increase the amount of learning that actually occurs in the classroom. In the fire service, training must meet the needs and the objectives of firefighters. Uh, as instructors, we face many different diversity challenges, Traditionally, the training is focused on physical activities. We know that in the fire service, the skill-based training is traditionally is the main focus. So we as instructors have to find a way to put together the cognitive along with the physical activity, along with the affect and desire of our students, and get them to that point, blend these things together, get it to the point where they effectively learn some in their own style to reach the naturalization point where they can naturally do these on skills and thought on an actual scenario and scene. In the last 15 years, the scope expanded beyond the hands-on type activity to the education side of our programs, and this is how we need to be writing our curriculums and our lesson plans. Learning styles of our personnel. Little research exists on preferred learning styles for firefighters in particular. Non-fire service research does show effectiveness of identifying and complementing how each person learns. Being able to be dynamic with that and their learning styles, I think, uh, is very effective. Select the best teaching approach for the style of students that we have. Measuring our learning styles, two groups of researchers. One group emphasized on the cognitive learning, where the other group uh, took in and encompassed the other factors. In general, distinctions in 3 or 4 learning styles are accepted as prototypes for the learning styles. Visual, auditory, and kinesthetic characteristics of our learning styles is based on the idea that students have preference based on sensory intake. Learners use all 3. One or more are dominant and filter information that is received. So some people take on, they can see it and they get it better. They can sit and listen to it, maybe look at a slide and it not totally come together, but then boom, they see the skill or the performance step by step and they're able to pick up on it as an example. And then some people also, they can see it and hear it and understand, but they don't put it together until they put their body in motion. They actually learn by doing and by practicing that skill. So we know that the auditory side is speech. The visuals could be graphs, charts, pictures, things in color. With the auditory, they're hearing. They hear what we're saying. They're listening to the lesson. The physical side of touch, hearing, smell, taste. We put our senses together. Uh, this focuses on how of learning, not the why of our learning styles. With visual learners, some differences. The eyes take in all the visual information. There may be some differences in perception among learners. Iconic or symbolic visualizers learn more effectively with diagrams or symbols or graphic type material. Textual visualizers prefer printed words, so reading and writing helps them out. Learning styles, inventory, uh, the visual auditory read write. This helps our students identify how they prefer to learn. And the visual auditory read write kinesthetic contains 13 questions and it indicates how learner prefers to receive or provide information. So the V is visual again, preference for charts, graphs, arrows, circles, so on and so forth, instead of the words. Oral, or the A, preference for heard, the auditory or the heard information. Learn best from lectures, tutorials, tapes, and discussion. The R's are read write, and these folks may have a preference for information displayed as words. They read, they comprehend, they understand the text, things in written form, and oftentimes will take notes. You'll have your note takers in class, and uh, folks that revert back to their written material or usually have a preference for this type of information. And then your K, the preference for hands-on training. Again, that muscle, that motion, um, kinesthetic. They practice, experience, example, practice, and simulate. Multimodals, the fifth category in the VARC preferences. The majority of adult learners have multiple learning style preferences. They may need to process certain information in more than one mode to learn effectively. So they may be good at, first they need the textual, to read and write and pick up on it, and then next they're going to move to the motion of things, the skill side or the step by step of things. Practical implications of this system: improves teaching and learning, use results in course design and classroom activities. This will help us design better lesson plans, present information with students' learning styles in mind. Compare teaching styles to learning styles of students. Make that comparison. Next is learning disabilities. We'll talk about the categories of learning disabilities. Uh, range inability to understand meaning of words, read, comprehend. An example is dyslexia, reading, seeing mixed up letters or backwards, and it can be difficult to overcome. Dysphagia, inability to write, spell, and to work out or form sentences. Dyscalculia is the difficulty with math or math-related subjects. So we get into where we use math in the fire service, and we do use math quite a bit, and so we can run into this disability as well. And dyspraxia, which is the lack of motor skill coordination, or we have some uncoordinated folks. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, a chronic level of inattention or hyperactivity. This can be treated, and there really isn't any cure. We've had a few folks in the past. This really affects them greatly if they're not taking a medication. They really have to train and focus. Sometimes some doctors will even tell you caffeine is one of the better things that help people. And it doesn't help everybody. There are medications out there that certainly help them focus, but this may be one. ADHD may be one that you encounter in your uh, time as an instructor. Color blindness or poor vision is another disability that can be a factor. Hearing loss, which is a common problem that occurs with aging. It's a common problem also with years of not using hearing protection in loud environments such as machinery, machine shops, loud noise, chainsaws, anything like that. And then English as a second language, not English not being an individual's primary language, can be, can kind of be a disability to their learning. So teaching students with any of these disabilities, first we may not know the student has problems until after a class starts or after a class begins. And so we may need to adjust our teaching for students with that are in these situations. Students not there, it doesn't mean that they're unintelligent or that they're unable to learn by no means. They just are going to pick up on the information in different ways. Usually average to high intelligent but they may perform poorly on a test or an exam. The ADA reasonable accommodations must be made for students with disabilities. The accommodations are not necessary if they create an undue hardship to the employer or the agency, or that they pose a direct threat to the safety and security of others. So these are the two things that you keep in mind, and you don't have to make reasonable accommodation if these two things uh, pose a problem to the situation. However, we should make every reasonable accommodation that we can to help these folks learn it. Some folks need an extended period of time, as an example, to take an exam. So they may need that extra 15, 20, or 30 minutes in order to, and it's because they don't read as well and fast as others. And so it takes a little bit more time. Those are the things that you can make accommodations for, and you can do that in a fair manner that is acceptable. Assisting strategies to assist students with learning disabilities may include breaking the material into smaller steps or components. So you break it down into smaller chunks, if you will. Could be supplying regular positive feedback without uh, singling a student out. Could be using diagrams, graphics, and pictures in support of a lecture as well. Scaffolding establishes a support system with presenting the new material. It gives the student the content, motivation, and the foundation of that new material. The strategies of scaffolding include activate the student's prior knowledge. So we look back, we think back, and we find ways to draw that prior knowledge out. And then we provide opportunity for the student to think and give a response from their own experiences. You can facilitate questions during a talk uh, and draw these responses out. Break a complex course material into easier pieces. And then show a student an example of the desired outcome. All right, here's what we're looking for. This is what we want at the end. Other strategies are to allow a student to brainstorm or think out loud while seeking a solution to the questions. Teach the student mnemonics, the techniques of mnemonics to help, and then teach key vocabulary terms before reading. Students are offered support to learn before removal of the scaffolding. Scaffolds should be removed gradually. Disruptive students, this is something if you teach enough you're going to encounter for whatever reason. People and the behaviors. A lot of times you'll get disruptive students that they're forced to be in class and they don't want to be there. But some students will act out in class, and often there are underlying issues with this. Uh, we want to minimize the impact on the class. Do not give in to perpetuating their behavior. You got to stand your ground on these people. Progressive listening in the classroom could be starting out with a stern look. I call it the stink eye or the evil eye. Use a question to bring them into the discussion. Sometimes you can redirect in a nice way, if you will, by using a question. Have a one-on-one conversation during the next break. Oftentimes, this is what it's going to come to. It'll come to you as an instructor having a one-on-one conversation at a break to kind of redirect uh, them back into the classroom and the learning environment. Ask him or her to leave the class as one of our uh, last resorts. You really don't want to have to do this, but we don't want to embarrass the students, and you don't want to embarrass yourself. So if it comes to having to ask somebody to leave class, you can take a break. At that break, you can explain to him or her, hey, you're going to have to leave. I'm not going to allow you to stay. You're very disruptive in the class. I've talked to you and this is not working out. And unfortunately, sometimes it does come to that. Most of the time we can handle this with the first two things, and especially the talk, and we get a decent response out of that student. But I had one several years ago. We were teaching a survival and rescue class, and after the first attempt of the first skill, took off his gear, went over, sat down in a chair, and never participated in the rest of the skills. Student who hesitates, we want to know why. Maybe there is something that we've not been told about. Could be a learning disability, could be just shy, reluctant, and quiet, personality, and it could be the lack of confidence, and this can keep them from participating. We want to handle this. We want to try to get all of our students engaged, and so um, we can ask non-threatening questions. Just try to find out dig a little bit, try to find out what's going on, and offer up that encouragement that we want you to participate. We need you to participate. You can do this. If you need help, we'll step you through it. It's no problem at all for us to step you through it. And if they're feeling embarrassed about it amongst their peers, you may be able to even draw in some of the peers to say to them, hey, it's all right. I don't know everything either, and I'll help you. Reassure again that the contributions are worthwhile, that they are important. Let them know again, hey, we really need you in here. We need you to do this. Sometimes we have students who are bored or quiet. The behavior is the result of a particular circumstance, maybe. Could be a lack of interest. Maybe they're forced to be in the class. Could be they're unfamiliar with, the material. And they could be just straight up, it could be boredom because they already have knowledge of, and a very intelligent knowledge of the subject. So these are folks, they may drift off, they may refuse to participate or become disruptive. And so by making our lectures interactive and concise to keep students interested and focused is one of the ways that we can, help deal with our bored students. Certainly if they become disruptive, it's probably going to come down to having a conversation, a one-on-one conversation with them. Sometimes we have students that are simply not interested in the topic. They may be in class because they have to be. It may be a requirement for a promotion, for the department. It could be fire chief said you had to take this. Could also be a required class at the state level. These folks may lack energy. They may lack attentiveness. We want to ask, is this a chronic problem? Maybe ask some questions. Is there a disability? If they're there with someone else in their department, maybe you can ask and pry around with some questions and find out some information that way. Sometimes we just talk to them and understand the problem. So we can address it through counseling, tutoring, or other means. First thing, probably the best thing to do is counsel. Talk to them, find out what's going on, and then offer up any tutoring, whether that be with one of the instructors or whether that be with some of their peers. Sometimes we have slow learners in our group. You'll notice that they have trouble keeping up, that they may not understand some or all of the material. Encourage input from other students. Hearing information rephrased oftentimes will help. Talk to the student during breaks to ensure that they're understanding, they're comprehending, and iron out any problems at that point. If they need extra help or they need more coaching, then we can offer that up in a couple different ways. We need to be able to work with our students, and many students have impediments to learning that many can compensate. They learn and know how to compensate very well. Recurring problems need to be addressed though. It's going to interfere with long-term learning. Discuss options with your students. Uh, Try to design a learning plan or pattern together to help them out. Usually you can work with them and you can come up with something that will fit. It'll still fit with the curriculum. It'll fit with the group or the other students as well. So we've talked about several things with this chapter. As fire service instructors, rather, we have a responsibility to deliver the information. We have the responsibility to hone skills, promote those good and positive values, and to motivate our students. And we've learned about the 6 laws of learningness: readiness, exercise, effect, primacy, recency, and intensity. We've learned how learning does and can involve the 5 senses, the behavior evolution theories that include both the behavioralist and cognitive. We've talked about cognitive perspective, the intellectual process, and our skills, physical based learning. And we've talked about how to tie those things in together. Mandating learning often results in a lack of motivation. People don't want to be there. They're unmotivated to receive the material. And we have to find ways to motivate our students. Study tips or study skills for the classroom, personal study, and preparation for exams we've discussed. We looked at the Maslow's hierarchy of needs for self-actualization. We talked about the 3 types of learning domains: the cognitive, psychomotor, and affective. We've talked about adult learners and how they have a distinct and preferred way to perceive, organize, and retain information. Most adult learners will adapt their learning style to a non-preferred style. Some need help with this. Some students we encounter will have learning disabilities and will require us to adjust things a little bit to help them out. And most often, disruptive students that we encounter there is another underlying issue there that is causing them to seek out attention in negative ways. And oftentimes, we can spend a little bit of time talking to them and steer them into the right direction of the class. And unfortunately, in the times that we cannot, we need to be prepared again to stand our ground, and we may need to dismiss somebody from our class.